Hey there, community bankers. Welcome back to the Correspondent podcast from Independent Correspondent Bankers Bank. I'm your host, Madison Kaplinger, Marketing Specialist for ICBB. For years, there's been a fundamental language barrier in banking. Marketers like me talk about impressions, engagement, and brand awareness, but the C-suite and the board are talking about efficiency ratios, loan-to-deposit balances, and return on equity. Today, we're tackling one of the toughest internal challenges in the industry: how to transition bank marketing from a perceived cost center into a documented revenue driver. I invited my good friend Eric Cook of marketing agency WSI, The Linked Banker, and most recently communitybanking.ai to discuss how to market your marketing to your C-suite and board so that they too can see your value. Please welcome Eric to the podcast. Hey there, community bankers. I'm here with Eric Cook of WSI, thelinkedbanker.com, and most recently communitybanking.ai or communitybank.ai?
Communitybanking.ai.
Communitybanking.ai.
As if that's not enough of a mouthful. Like I need more things to do. But yeah, so we got 3 things going on right now, but that keeps things interesting.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you.
You too.
More than once in a while down in Columbus. So I appreciate coming on the show and getting the time to catch up a little bit.
Yeah. Appreciate you coming on. It's funny you said down in Columbus because it's up for me, but
it's way down for me. I've got a little bit of a drive to get there from northern Michigan, but it's all good and it's well worth the trip for sure.
I agree. So for those who, I know I had you on the podcast a few years ago, but for those who didn't catch that episode or aren't familiar with you and your work, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I can't believe they wouldn't be listening to every single episode that you publish, but I appreciate coming back and chatting more because things certainly have changed. So as you said, my name is Eric. I consider myself a recovering banker of 15 years. I left the world of banking in 2007. Decided I wanted to go play on the internet for a living and not be the CEO of a publicly traded bank. I taught myself HTML and launched MarshallSavings.com back in 1995 before we really even knew why we would want to have a website or what a website policy or maybe even getting approval was. But built that and really kind of fell in love with technology and innovation. And so now for the last almost 19 years, based here in Michigan, we've been working with community banks around the country, building websites and hosting and doing search marketing and SEO and ads. And as you can tell, most recently leaning into artificial intelligence. But I get to do a lot of speaking and communicating and networking with bank marketing directors around the country. 4 different state banking associations have trusted me to do their marketing seminars, marketing forums. And so being able to come in and sit with marketing directors and share ideas and thoughts and what's on their mind, what's frustrating them, what are the things that they're looking to do. And that keeps me really well connected and grounded into the industry because I do a lot of speaking and teaching at banking schools. So having that awareness of what marketing directors are struggling with and what they're excited about is awesome. And so it's what brought us together and so many other marketers like yourself. And it's been a real treat to have been able to do that now for, several years. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can attest to the job you do with the CBAO, the Ohio affiliated Bankers Association, that marketing forum. I think we all get a lot out of that. The building the website, it's really, it shows how far we've come that, at the time it's like why we didn't even know why we would want to build a website. And now I can't imagine. I know there probably are banks that don't have a website, but it's hard to imagine.
I think most banks have websites. It's a matter of whether or not they think of the website as a strategic tool. Because I think there's still some smaller websites that are in communities where they're well known. And at the end of the day, as long as it's easy for their customers to get to it and log into their online banking and get access to their account information, that's maybe enough. But over the last several years, it definitely has shifted and evolved. And even though in the age of AI, I think there's a lot of people that'll say, oh, a website's not going to be important. Everybody's going to find all their information in artificial intelligence, and they're just going to chat GPT or Google AI overviews is going to give us all the info. But they've got to get the information for those AI platforms from somewhere. And so that can be your bank's website. But when they're ready to actually start the application or they want to dive in and learn more, it's evolving what really needs to be part of your website and going beyond just information of how do I repair my credit score and 5 reasons why you need to be a homeowner and not a renter. You got to get into a little bit more detail that demonstrates subject matter expertise and authority and make it easy. So when I decide, okay, I'm ready to apply for a loan or I'm ready to open an account, I've convinced myself based off of all this research and reading, how am I going to do that easily through your website? Because at least as of the date and time of this recording, you can't apply for a loan or open a checking account on ChatGPT. You got to go somewhere to do that. And you may not want to get in the car and drive to a bank to do that. So how can you do that through their website? And that's really what we're trying to continue to maintain relevancy for and help banks figure that out. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think as, some of this stuff evolves, you'll need to be able to cut through more and more noise. And
absolutely. Yeah.
a website's a way to do that for sure.
Yep. I agree 100%. 100%. So
yeah. So
yeah.
I know you are about to host or have hosted, I'm not sure at the time of this if it's come out yet, a webinar on the concept of marketing your marketing to your board and C-suite.
Yes.
But
have not as of the date and time of this recording, but depending on when that happens, you can go back to poweredbywsi.com and there's a webinar section there. So when that happens, you'll find it there. We're doing that in partnership with our friends over at Bank Marketing Center. So Neil Reynolds and his team have been, they've become really good friends of ours and a personal friend of mine. And we've teamed up on a number of marketing related webinars, but this is really an inspiration for kind of a webinar, I guess a presentation that I've had in the back of my mind for years. And I got to deliver it for the first time at the end of 2025 for the Massachusetts Bankers Association at one of their events. And the whole genesis around that was through the Indiana Bankers Association, which is one of the forums I've been doing the longest. A number of the marketers would say on a repeated basis, it's just so hard to get traction with the C-suite, or I go in and I sit down with my president and try to explain what I'm doing as a marketing and, ask him what he thinks and just I'm not feeling the love, and is it because they came up through lending and they just don't believe in marketing? And so we had an opportunity to bring in via phone, a gentleman who had created the bank CEO network, guy by the name of Bob Walters. And we brought him in and he shared some really interesting insights with the group that were the whole genesis for this presentation. Is CEOs maybe don't have a real understanding of what marketing does, so they don't understand it, but they're also a very prideful position within the bank. Maybe you wouldn't want to admit that they don't know something. And so what happens a lot of times is marketers will approach, typically in a smaller bank, it's the CEO or someone in that capacity, and ask maybe permission or want to get feedback. Because as marketers, we like to talk, we like to collaborate, we like to kind of air things out and have a discussion. It's what I love about being in the room with you and everybody else in Columbus and the other areas, is we just throw things out on the table and we chat about it. And that may not necessarily be the best approach when you're in the room with your CEO. You're going to need to think of a different way of presenting that. And he talked about a number of different things that went into this presentation that really shifted the mindset for a lot of the bankers that were like, that seems like a different way of approaching it. And I was able to deliver this at the Indiana Bankers Mega Conference earlier this year in 2026, and it went over really well. And I had some marketers in the audience that were giving me kind of the amen and the preach, brother, preach kind of response when I was saying some things. So, yeah, it'll be fun to dive in and unpack some of that stuff on today's podcast and kind of get into that in the webinar and really help the marketers out there that are listening figure out ways that you can maybe set up your communication with others in your organization. But if you are the others, understand that's maybe why the marketer is doing this, and there needs to be maybe an understanding because it's not a loan account, it's not deposit, it's not cybersecurity. Usually, the marketing person's like one of the only people in the organization that's talking about this stuff. But it's really important because without marketing and there's no visibility and no awareness, and that's not a good thing. So hopefully that paints probably somewhat of a long-winded picture of where the genesis of this presentation came from.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a scenario a lot of bank marketers can relate to because, like you said, we kind of speak a little bit of a different language than a lot of the banking world. And it's easy for there to be a disconnect there, especially between some of the highest level decision makers. So you've kind of alluded to, other parties in the bank to which you might need to market your marketing. So what are some of those audiences? I mean, the C-suite comes to mind as low-hanging fruit, but I mean, what else are we?
Yep. So definitely the C-suite, because they're the ones that are predominantly interested in the financial results and the performance of what it is that we're doing as marketing professionals. I think the compliance, we're very familiar with compliance because if we're doing ads or promotions, we're probably already having conversations with those folks. So building a good relationship there so that you can work with them on figuring out. And I think that relationship has evolved over the years. I hear more and more marketers comment about how they really like their compliance team, which I know seems a little bit like an oxymoron. Everybody wants to make fun of compliance because they're the Department of No and they've got the bad reputation. But I think a lot of the marketers have realized working alongside the compliance, the mindset of how can we enable you to do this? How can we make it possible to help marketing, promote the bank, promote our products and services, talk about our customers, share the success stories that other people out in the market really care about so that we can make an impact in the crowded, noisy marketplace that we operate in. And so I'll give a nod of kudos to the compliance folks out there that marketers seem like you're helping them get their job done better. I think the retail side and maybe even like customer service, so your teller staff, your branch staff, having conversations with them about what it is that they can do to help support you. Marketing can't just operate in a vacuum and drive traffic back to a branch and have people show up and not have an organization that understands what it is that the campaign's for. How does this work? What are they talking about? So that is another area. And then, like the sales side of the bank. And one of the webinars that we just recently did with the Bank Marketing Center, I partnered up with my good friend Jack Hubbard, and we talked about how sales and marketing often don't really, I don't want to say get along, because they get along, but they don't really understand. The sales side just wants leads, and the marketing side wants to build visibility. But if they're doing it independently of one another, it's not very efficient. And so, I go back and I think, the reason that we created the Linked Banker as a mentoring and a mastermind community was to try to help individual banking professionals more so on the sales side. Think the branch management, the business development officers, the lenders, commercial loan officers, really figure out how they can use social tools, things like LinkedIn to build subject matter expertise. But then the marketing team can assist with that. We can build out really cool headline banner and images for LinkedIn. We can put together infographics. We can help frame articles and other sorts of content that's thought leading and informational and not just salesy schmalesy stuff, because at the end of the day, nobody really wants to go on LinkedIn and feel like they're being pitched and sold to. But if I'm a small business and I'm reading content from a business banker that's helping me better run my business, answer the questions that are keeping me up at night, And the marketing person is the one that can help come up with some of those ideas or take those ideas and refine them and make them even more effective. That's a really powerful 1-2 punch. And so collaborating with various, you can probably work with all the different areas of the bank at the end of the day from a marketer's perspective. Even on the website, things like making updates and posting new content. There's still some community banks that we work with that the website is under full control of the technology department, which back in the day might have been a good solution because maybe you needed technical expertise and you didn't want the marketing people in there jacking it up and making mistakes. But now content management and other platforms have just make it really easy. It really needs to be more of a marketing tool, and then just let the technology people know, we're not going to play in the server area, or we're not going to mess around with any of the, important switches and knobs and bells and whatnot to change server security, but making it much more of a sales engine and an information piece. So, I think marketing touches all areas of the bank.
Right. And I appreciate you kind of teasing that out because, I've been very fortunate, like our compliance officer, Christy, who is going to listen to this, shout out, Christy, has been wonderful to work with. And our sales team is, great at collaboration. But because.
And Christy, she totally didn't tee me up to say that. That was completely genuine and unrehearsed.
She paid you.
So
yeah.
You can give me my $20 next week when I see you in Columbus. So that'll work.
Yes.
Yep, perfect.
And, our sales team has been great at, collaborating on not just lead generation, but, I look at visibility as warming up the ground for them. But I think it's also easy because we have so many different departments that do pretty different things to become kind of siloed.
Sure.
Within a bank. And, that can cause a little bit of a disconnect between especially marketing and, a C-suite and a board or, the other departments. And you touched on this a little bit when you were kind of introducing the idea, but what is marketing doing or maybe not doing that tends to lead executives to see it as more of a cost center than a growth driver?
Yeah. So I think it's the metrics that we're tracking just by our nature as marketing people. We tend to understand the importance of, even though we can't always put a dollar amount to, some of the softer signals of things like impressions and visibility and engagement. Those are important. If we do some social posts or we share some content or we send an email and we get a lot of opens and clicks, those are good signs that people are enjoying our content, that it's something that struck a chord, that's helpful, that's going towards that relationship building and that brand credibility creation process. That doesn't always constitute to a hard dollar ROI. And the ability to try to translate that into, okay, well, what did this do from an account generation perspective, or what are the the real nuts and bolts numbers of all of this? You spent this amount of money, but what did it actually get me in return? So trying to figure out how we can put ourselves in the shoes of the CFO or the CEO or the COO and try to understand what it is that's important to them. And oftentimes that's as easy as just sitting down and saying, what's important to you? And having a discussion around that to try to get at how you can go measure that and to be able to provide those types of statistics back to that individual. And one of the soapboxes, you've heard me jump on it probably at least a couple of times as it relates to ROI, is it's really difficult from a marketer's perspective to calculate a hard dollar ROI with a lot of the tools that we have access to, because we may be using a mortgage platform that has online application capability, and we might be spending $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 or more a month in ads. We can track when the ad is seen through impressions. We can track when the ad is clicked on to see what visitor traffic we're driving back to the website, which is a click-through rate. We can figure out how many people on that landing page then click the nice big red button that says apply online or get your loan started today. But once they leave our landing page, they become invisible because the platforms, and I'm not going to name any of them, but the platforms that we're using to collect the application information doesn't allow for us to transfer any sort of analytics. We can't use conversion pixels. We don't have any ability to see, okay, well, of the 75 people this month that clicked on that big fat red button that said apply online, I don't know how many of those actually turned into a mortgage loan. It's really hard for me to do that because the platform doesn't give me that. And most of the time, senior management doesn't have a foggy clue that that's the case. And when they find that out, they say, you got to be kidding me. And the answer is no, I'm not. And so then that allows for others in the organization to hopefully get a little fired up and have some conversation. Because at the end of the day, as a marketing person in a bank, you are going to have a certain amount of control. And then beyond that, you're not going to get the mortgage department to change loan software platforms. But you can spark the dialogue as to why that particular loan software should be providing you, or maybe there's another way to provide you with access to tracking metrics because the CEO or whoever is tracking the dollars and the cents inside of the organization is having an expectation they want to know that. And so even if you can't solve that for today, it at least paints the picture on the lending side that, hey guys, the next time we select or have conversations with a loan platform or a deposit platform or any platform for that matter, that marketing is going to expect to drive traffic to and to generate business from, it might not be a bad idea to at least invite me to the discussion. So I can sit at the table and ask the question, because when you signed this agreement 2 years ago, you probably didn't have a foggy clue that somebody in the marketing department would want to be able to track the activity so that we could validate of that $8,000 a month that we're spending in mortgage ads, how many mortgages are we actually creating as a result of that? So that's the first thing that I think needs to be explained, because if we can't attribute a number, it's going to be really hard for us to go any further. The other element that is part of my kind of ROI soapbox is trying to get management to share with us as marketing professionals what the actual return is for a new mortgage client, like thinking about the lifetime value of a new mortgage customer. And unless you have got some modeling software, or you've done some profitability calculations, that's a number that oftentimes is not known. Maybe at the mortgage level it is, maybe at the business loan level it is, but at the checking account level, do we know what the lifetime value of a new checking account customer is? How long do they stay? What fees do we make off of them? On average, do they use a debit card and are they generating interchange? Do they bounce a check and they get NSF fee? Are they using a program that's charging them a fall below fee, or maybe a club account that's $10 a month for a bunch of premium perks? And then does that relationship have a tendency to get other relationships? So maybe 20% of those checking account customers have an auto loan. Maybe 10% of those checking account customers get a mortgage. So what are the fee opportunities and the income opportunities in those areas? And then you boil that down to, okay, the average mortgage customer's got a $7,500 lifetime value, and the average checking account customer is, $1,250. So then we can go in and say, well, we generated 2 mortgage customers this month. Well, that's $15,000 in lifetime value if that $7,500 number is right. And if we generated $15,000 in lifetime value and I spent $8,000 in advertising, it's a pretty good return on investment. But if you don't know what the numerator is in any of these equations, it's impossible to really get a good calculation. Your CFO would not be able to give you a return on equity or return on assets if he or she didn't know the numerator and the denominator. Yet the marketing department is one of the few areas in the bank expected to calculate an ROI when we don't know what the R is. We just know what our investment is because we can see the ad budget, the media spend, production materials, how much did it cost for all the koosh balls and Yeti mugs, we've got all of that, but what's the top number? And we need some help generating that. And that's where that collaborative process, you can start that dialogue with your team within the bank to figure out how you can get that, or at least have them give you a number of what they think it is, and then move on from there and adjust accordingly. So, sound familiar?
Yes. Very much so. Yes. Lesson one of having a marketing department: invite them to your meetings.
Absolutely.
When the Bankers Bank first started running ads, I would get the question all the time of like, can we see like who clicked on the ad, like identifying information? And it's like, no, definitely can't, because that'd be a massive
What IP address are they coming from? Do we know where they live? You can't get that either. Sorry, they hide that. That's called privacy.
Do we have their social? No, unfortunately not. It would make things easier for us. For them, though, big problem. But yeah, like you said, we're essentially speaking different languages. CEOs and CFOs are thinking about things like net interest margin and return on assets, return on equity. And we often are working with numbers where we don't know exactly what the return is. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that in mind, how does a marketer translate concepts, the things we do know, things like brand awareness, into a language that the CFO can kind of wrap their head around?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I talked about in this presentation that I developed was like the concept of a lunch and learn. Like, take your show on the road. Like, the things that you do know. SEO is something that is getting a lot of conversation now with my marketing friends, because traditional SEO, answer engine optimization, generative engine optimization. Here at WSI, we call it adaptive SEO. We trademarked that before AI was even on the scene. But what oftentimes happens is the marketer who's not a mortgage expert, not a commercial banking expert, not a cash management or treasury management expert, goes to those very subject matter experts within the bank and says, hey, I need some information. I want to write a blog post. I want to create an information series. I want to build some FAQs. I want to create some content that, the honey, so we can collect some bees, get some interest out there. And you'll hear things like, well, I'm too busy, or just look it up, or here's some brochures or whatever. And so part of the lunch and learns are to explain to others in the organization, whether it's at the C-level or the mortgage team or the commercial team or your retail salespeople, and dispel, okay, when I come to you and I ask for help, or I want a testimonial from a customer that I can weave into a Facebook ad or a post, this is why I want it, because these are signals that make a difference. These are things that are non-commodity related content that's unique to us. That is what is going to take to move the needle to help us lead to the point where we can generate visibility, which drives to traffic, which ends up in hopefully conversions. That could be newsletter subscriptions, or it could be followers on social, or it could be appointments or traffic coming into the office. But these lunch and learns to help people understand what goes in, I think, have the opportunity to reveal, like, oh my gosh, I had no idea Madison did so much, or I had no idea that that's why she keeps asking me questions about X, Y, or Z. It's not that Madison or any of the other marketing folks out there want to be a pain and an annoyance and just want to be the whole, like, knock 3 times, to penny, 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 and try to get them to open the door. It's that you need that content to be able to help build relevancy and to kind of lead them through that process. And at the end of the day, you can educate some people around what really is and isn't going on. So that will also hopefully help some of those, like, drop-ins on a 4:30 Friday afternoon. Oh, by the way, I forgot, we've got a realtor open house this weekend and I need all these flyers available. It's like sharing all of the stuff that's going on in your world. You're busy as a marketing professional. You're just busy doing different things that a typical banker's not doing. But everybody understands when accounting's busy, or when the loan department's busy, or when the customer service area is busy, marketing tends to be a little bit on its own. So I think that education process, and then people will start to connect the dots, and then they'll see, oh, so we need to build an audience in order to create engagement, because that then spawns loyalty. And the longer somebody's loyal to us, the higher likelihood that they'll want to do business or continue doing business. Those are the light bulb moments that we want to be able to facilitate by just educating the audience that we work with on a day in and day out basis.
Yeah, for sure. And, we've done a little bit of that education internally. I've definitely had conversations.
Sure.
I know I bug the rest of our staff a lot to be on the podcast or to be in videos and things like that. And some people definitely like being on camera more than others. Some people kind of run from me, avoid me. They might kill me in my sleep one day. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, that's, to your point, that kind of visibility is
Sure.
explaining that visibility I've found has kind of helped their willingness to get out of their comfort zone to
Yep.
that end.
And if even somebody doesn't want to be on camera, you can just sit down and have a discussion, use the voice recorder on your iPhone and just record the conversation, and then it'll get transcribed. And now you've got all the words of the discussion around that particular question or their topic or that, concern that a prospective customer might have. And at least you've got that as a starting point. And then the marketing team can go back and work its magic and turn that into beautiful content. That's a blog post, it's tweets, it's Instagram updates. Then we can do our job to make you look good. But we need to have the basics of the information from you in your voice so that we're not making things up and can carry that through. And at the end of the day, you could always just take a picture of your lenders and turn them into talking babies on the internet and, just make it look like them. So, I've not done that to other people, but baby Eric has known to show up on occasion out on LinkedIn and just share a few things. And that's kind of a fun way to stop the scroll too, but still add some valuable content. So that's always fun.
I'm trying to think who at ICBB would let me do that and who would kill me. I don't know.
The answer is probably not many and most probably to that. Who would let you and who would probably kill you? But
most would kill me.
Yeah. So but it's always fun.
Right. That is true. And I think especially in the age of AI, being able to inject the voice of the more senior seasoned people in your organization into it can only help you stand out as well. So that's a great idea as well. So if you kind of wanted to take a real world example, so how do you reframe a typical marketing expense, something like say a $50,000 digital campaign for a C-suite member who, you're asking for approval for this? How do you reframe that as a direct investment in the bank's balance sheet goals rather than just another line item expense?
So I think it's all about how you present it as a marketer. And this is where Bob really shared some insights with us when we had him share his time, is rather than go, because you are the marketing person in your bank. This is your area of expertise. And if you're not comfortable doing this, then maybe you need to, spend a little bit more time making sure that you've got marketing strategy and planning nailed down pretty well. But assuming that you're comfortable with that, rather than taking that $50,000 budget and going to your C-suite and approaching it like you maybe have, where, this is what we're thinking about doing, and here's the ads, and what do you guys think, and it's develop the plan and the strategy and put together a concise, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to measure it, these are the results that we're expecting. If you're working on this with an agency or a marketing partner, lean on them. What have you seen? What sorts of results should we have? What kind of audience should this budget get us? What sort of impression share should we be able to capture based off of this dollar amount? And then build that as a plan to not go in and say, this is what we hope, is to say, here's the plan. We're going to spend $50,000 over the next 6 months. That's going to generate us based off of averages, close to $3.5 million or 3.5 million impressions. Those impressions are going to drive traffic back to a strategically designed, conversion-focused landing page. So we're removing all the distraction of the navigation menu and the login. So we're going to drive them into a page that's going to be very specific for a marketing funnel. That's going to likely generate X amount of clicks. That's going to take us into a process. And then, we're estimating, and if you're not sure what those numbers are, spend some time doing some deep research. Fire up ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or Copilot and go use deep research and say, I'm working on a campaign for X. I want to generate more mortgage loans. As a community banking professional, give it a geographic area. What have you seen? Are there research articles out there? Is there anything that talks about the average lifetime value of a new mortgage client? And get some numbers and then validate those numbers, cite those numbers. Well, according to the ABA or the ICBA or the Mortgage Brokers Association, whatever the case is, cite the numbers that you're bringing in as a legitimate business plan so that all of the things that you're recommending have got thought and reasoning behind it as to here's how I am going to take the $50,000 over 6 months and turn this into new mortgage customers. And those mortgage customers are going to be worth this. And we're going to get there because of these click-through rates and these conversion rates. Now, there needs to also be some caveat in there because if you're driving leads back, your mortgage team's going to need to pick up the phone and make the phone call. If somebody applies for a loan and they don't finish the application, somebody's going to be monitoring those abandoned, hey, Madison, this is Eric at XYZ Bank. I saw you started a mortgage app a couple of, weeks ago and didn't look like you finished it. I just wanted to call and say, hi, did you have a question? Was there something that you needed or, well, yeah, I forgot, my husband's, don't know what his driver's license number is. And I, just forgot to get back in or whatever the case is. So there needs to be that understanding of how others in the organization are going to be expected to roll this out and to be able to assist you, and then build into that plan some sort of an internal training program, build into that plan maybe a talking point document where we're going to deliver this to everybody that's on the teller staff that's answering incoming phone calls. Here's our campaign, here's our hook, here's how we're different from the others that are in the market area. So it becomes much more of a strategic campaign delivery as opposed to, I'd like $50,000 and let's talk about it. Because they're not going to know what to talk about and likely aren't going to want to admit that they don't know what to talk about. And so then they're just going to not want to talk about it. And that's going to be very frustrating. So come with a plan and a strategy in mind. And then if they say no, then you can have a constructive, what is it about the plan that you need additional information on? Because if I'm presenting this $50,000 plan, I better be able to prove that it's going to generate more than $50,000 in lifetime value or revenue or whatever. This could be $3-4 million. Where are we missing the mark? What don't you believe? What needs further validation? And now you can start the dialogue and the discussion, because then you can fit yourself into that educator role as opposed to going to them and saying, hey, what do you think? Help me decide. I think that's going to position you a lot better. The challenge there is there's a lot of marketing people that come into banking that aren't bankers. They're marketers. And so some of that is, how do I understand what that banker lingo is? And that it's kind of almost like a chicken and the egg thing, I guess. I've heard bankers that have said, like, well, if I don't know what metrics to go after, then I don't know what metrics to report. So there may need to be some preliminary discussion around that, just to say, hey, I want to do a better job of providing you some meaningful campaign recommendations and plans, but I need for you to, maybe help me understand what are the key goals, and try to, put yourself in the student position. I know a lot of the banking programs and banking schools out there, especially for marketing professionals, will start off with a business of banking. Like, this is what ROI is, this is what ROE is, this is what ROA is, this is what net interest margin, and, so that you have at least an understanding of what those are. If that's not open to you, again, I'll go back to AI and say, I'm a marketing director. I really don't know a ton about banking, but I love the industry. What are the metrics that matter to the C-suite? And explain them to me like I'm a 5-year-old marketing person that's not a banking finance executive. And so, platforms like Notebook LM and even just, the deep research tools can be really, really valuable in helping you understand what you need to understand to be able to have those good conversations with others in your organization. That was a lot. But my
It
brain
was, and
just,
there's several things I want to dive back into, but yeah, I like what you said.
yeah,
The deep research function, I started using that, I think, last year, my strategic planning, and it was a real lifesaver.
yeah,
Gemini is my go-to
yep,
for things like that. And then, I also find it helpful to look up like industry benchmarks. Like if you're running digital ads, like what's the benchmark, cost per click or engagement rate or whatever for
yep,
the banking and
absolutely.
finance industry. So you kind of know if it's performing, the way you would like to. But there are two things you said I kind of want to come back to. One
Sure.
is the frustration part of uh, the conversation. One of the kind of frustrating pieces of pushback I know marketers can get in the banking realm is kind of the like, we've always done it this way type of roadblock, or,
No,
you
I've
know,
never heard that before. I know what you're talking about.
never. We're so
Never,
open to change.
never, never,
Um,
never.
or the board member who, kind of wants to judge your digital strategy by their personal Facebook habits. So how do you
Or they've
tactfully
got a
handle?
12-year-old kid that's really, really good on Instagram, and you need to be doing
Yeah,
everything that he or she's doing, right?
no, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So how
yeah.
do you tactfully handle that kind of pushback?
I think you probably need to be very careful with that, obviously. I mean, you need to listen and take that into consideration. But at the end of the day, the hope is you are the marketing person, and you can maybe take some of that information and make it sound like you're listening. I hate to say that out loud, and I don't want you to be deceitful, but if there are things that you're recommending because of where you sit from a marketing perspective, I think you should be able to back that up and say, well, it's great. That might work for you. I often hear it on the inverse of, well, nobody goes on Facebook anymore, or I don't use it for that, or I can't believe, they may not be your target audience. You might not be a first time homeowner browsing TikTok looking for tips and suggestions of how you can buy a house with no money down. You're a board member with more money in the bank than most people have, and that's not, you're not the target audience. And so trying to figure out a way you can say that obviously respectfully without getting fired, but are you the target audience? Is this really, an apples to apples comparison? Or is this more of a, I get it, if we were going after someone that is in your demographic, this certainly wouldn't be the strategy that I would recommend because you're completely different than what we're going after. But this is the target audience, and this is why I'm recommending it based off of the research and the studies and the other sorts of things that I've gotten access to that I'm providing you that's cited and has all sorts of good information on it. Because the deep research gives you those citations and references to back it up. They're not going to argue with the ABA or the ICBA or any of the others because those are vetted research papers and deep, knowledge blocks that have got some really good information to them. So I don't know what, I guess
Right.
I'm curious to see what your thoughts are, if there's anything else that you would add from a marketer's perspective, because you're a sharp marketer. Any other suggestions that you might have?
But no, I agree with everything you said. And I had to have, a similar conversation to what you were saying when we first started running ads. I had a person or two that was like, I don't see our ads when I get on LinkedIn. Where are they? It was like, well, because you don't work for a community bank in these states. But I did
Yeah.
find now granted, these were not decision makers asking me this, but once I was able to kind of lay all that out plainly, they were like, oh, okay. So
Yep.
yeah, I agree. I think the best thing you can do is just kind of, present facts and data and things that are not really arguable and
Yeah.
just,
Yep.
have your case built solidly that
Yeah.
way.
Try to keep the emotion out of it. Just
Yeah.
the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Kind
Mhm.
of share that information and say, well, this based off of the research that I have access to,
Yeah.
these are the reasons why I'm making the decisions that I am. This is the data that I have to back up why I'm making these decisions. And, the hope is that those will speak for themselves.
I've also
So,
had that conversation in other, not necessarily in banking, but in other roles I've held about Facebook, where people have, thought like, oh, well, is Facebook dying? The kids aren't on Facebook. It's like, well, it does still have the largest user base of any of the platforms. It
yeah,
does. It doesn't skew quite as young as TikTok, for example, but
yeah,
people are still on it, so it is still good use of your dollars, more than likely.
yep, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's where you can't argue. You can be thinking in your head that like, oh, Facebook is blah, blah, but you can't argue with the numbers.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to go back to is a question I think you might have answered when you were talking about, having the plan, having numbers, having data. A lot of the time when budgets get tight and banks need to trim their expenses, marketing is kind of the first chopping block.
Yeah.
And, obviously we host a quarterly market update podcast. And the past year, the buzzword has been uncertainty. So yeah, so this could become an important conversation. But
Yeah.
what proactive steps can a marketer take throughout the year so that their budget is untouchable? Does that just come down to kind of having those figures and having that data all lined up?
I think it's having the data and the figures lined up. I think it's trying to do as good of a job as you can to provide attribution to what it is that you're doing. And then it's segmenting out, because in the marketing budget, typically marketers get the donations, they get the tchotchkes, they get the community events and activities. So the ad that goes on the pancake breakfast placemat for $500, those are the sorts of things that are very difficult to demonstrate tangible return. They're good, feel good stuff. And they're things that maybe you need to do as a community participant. But if you could figure out a way that you could separate the marketing and the advertising dollars, and maybe out of the marketing, you separate the donations and the contributions to some of the other marketing and the awareness, so you can create those buckets so that if for some reason there is a need to scale back down the road, we're not scaling back generically from the stuff that's actually producing results and building visibility and maybe creating. We scale back on the things that might be the touchy feel. Everybody's got the pet project that somebody had that, we probably don't need to do that anymore. And it's so separating those out and having a little bit more control, or maybe that budget goes someplace else. Maybe that's no longer a budget that resides in the marketing area. Your budget gets cut, but now that gets pushed to the retail and it gets shoved down to the branch offices, and each branch is responsible for $1,000 of community donations. So now each branch has those decisions to determine what it wants to do from a donation and a contribution perspective in the community. Marketing can support that with an ad or something, but now maybe that budget doesn't need to be controlled by you, because at the end of the day, you don't really have a whole lot of say in it anyway. And those typically aren't expenses that are generating or have the even intent to generating an ROI. It's just feel good, we're here. So having a definition of how much that really needs to be And then maybe that moves outside of marketing and goes someplace else. I know a lot of marketing directors would prefer that happen, because those aren't fun budgets to manage anyway. And it's always been a contentious, like, what are we getting for this? Well, there's really no intent to get anything for this. Somebody has pancakes in the breakfast and they see our ad. It's just nice to know that we're there, but we're not going to get any checking accounts out of it or any mortgage loans out of it. That's not the intent. And maybe those are some decisions that need to be made.
Right. And we don't want the bank down the street to be on the placemats instead of us next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So some of it's a little bit defensive strategy as well. So
right.
Yeah, that's a good
and
point.
Brand awareness. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've outlined a lot to think about, and it's been a really good conversation. But I have one last question.
One last question
for $5 million. I'm just kidding.
Mm-hmm. I need to phone a friend. Hold on just a second. One moment.
Not me. No one should call me if there's $1 million on the line. But if a community bank marketer is listening to this right now and they realize they've been like, oh crap, I've been reporting all the wrong metrics to the CEO, and now they just like, they don't understand what I do, or they, I really led them astray in this area. What's the very first thing they should do tomorrow morning to reset that relationship?
Oh boy, that's a really good question. I thought you were going to ask something else, but you didn't. I would say chances are that marketing person doesn't or hasn't taken the time to sit down with the appropriate individual within the organization to really get the answers to those questions. So if they don't know if they're asking the right questions or not, then find out who within the organization would know the answers to those questions. And I would start the conversation with, hey, I just listened to this podcast. It got me thinking. I think I have a good idea, but I'm also not 100% sure. But I think you're the person within the bank, or you're one of the people within the bank that I think I need to spend some more time with to get an idea of, am I going in the right direction? Are we all pulling the rope at the same, like the whole tug of war thing, or are we all over the place? And I would set up some one-on-one conversations with folks and just start to have those discussions to see whether or not you are going in the right direction, or maybe there is a shift. In your mind, what are the strategic priorities of the bank? This is what I've been operating under, but are we in alignment? Because it's unfortunate the number of marketing directors that I've talked to that I just say, well, just get access to your strat plan, analyze it, understand what your goals are, and then align your marketing strategy around that. And they're like, yeah, I don't get access to the strategic plan. That's at the board level. They don't let me see that. And so, so at that point, and I've actually had marketers that have said, our board wants us to start advertising, so we need to talk about doing an ad campaign. And I'll say, okay, what do they want to advertise? What's the goal? Loans, deposits, visibility, digital innovation, convenience, lead gen. What do you want? And they're like, oh boy, I don't know. That's a really good question. So, they want us to spend money, but they got to give us the direction. So find the individual or individuals within the organization and then spend some time chatting with them and ask them the questions. I think they will appreciate your curiosity and wanting to know the answers to those questions, because then that will help you be a better marketer and make sure that your goals and your outcomes are more closely aligned with those desired goals and outcomes that the bank has. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, so you're getting their buy-in there and also informing your strategy.
Exactly. So good question.
Yeah, I think the sell is there. Give me what I need and I will become so much less annoying.
I will stop bugging you if you tell me exactly what it is that you need me to do. Yeah,
Yeah,
tell me the
exactly.
expectations, and then I'll stop
Hmm.
asking you questions. Give me the strategic plan. Let me read it. Let me understand it. I'll come back and tell you what I think it means, and then I'll build you a plan as a marketing director for this bank, and let's rock and roll. At the end of the day, I know we've talked now for an hour. I can't believe the time has flown by so fast. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't want to say it's not rocket science, but at the end of the day, if you just know the answers and what you're shooting for, it should be a pretty easy thing for you to at least put together a plan to go after that target. And that's really what I hope that this conversation does for those that are listening, is it presents you with that framework, or it gives you that reassurance or that validation that you can do it. And those are some things that you need to know. I'll close with a story that there was a banker. I'm going to leave her anonymous for now, but I've mentioned her in person a couple of times. But she was a banker and is a banker in Indiana, and sat through that, and was one of the ones that was frustrated. And after we started kind of talking about this and Bob shared, she made the decision just to show up to Alco the next month. She sat in the back of the room. Everybody's like looking around, like, what's the marketing person doing at the asset liability committee meeting? Why is she here? What does she need to know about pricing? But nobody asked her to leave. And then she showed up at the next one. And people were like, I guess, okay, she can sit in the back. And then she showed up the next one. And then she came back to the marketing forum the next time. And she's like, you guys are not going to believe this. I just showed up to Alco and they didn't kick me out. And then after a few meetings, I kind of figured out what it was that they were talking about. So then I actually could ask some questions about pricing and rates and fees so that I could refine my marketing strategy. And then they kind of realized, hey, it might not be a bad idea to have marketing here in Alco, because that might be pricing your loans based off of what everybody else in your community is doing, or your CDs based off of what everybody else in your community is doing, is a follower strategy. It's not a
Right.
leader strategy. And so with marketing now being aware of what was going into that, it helped her provide more value. And before you knew it, she was a regularly contributing participant in Alco. Now, you might show up to your first Alco meeting and they're going to show you the door, and you have a conversation with your boss and like, why are you at Alco, Madison? You got to have a good answer for it. As the marketing director, I would like to know. And maybe you might want to ask permission first. Hey, could I sit in an Alco? I know it's a sensitive meeting and I'm not going to say anything, but I just want to see what goes into pricing, because I'm the marketing person. Imagine if the person that's responsible for marketing products and services on Amazon had no say in what they're priced at. That'd be ridiculous. Bezos would be like, there's no way. Those product specialists are involved in every single pricing discussion to know, do you have incentives? Are there rebates? What's everybody else? So that's what the profit margins and the costs. To have that not be the case in the banking industry is just crazy. So, so who knows? Maybe just show up and show the gumption, and you want to learn because you want to do a better job. You need to know your audience better, but that might be a really good way of just taking the bull by the horns. So
that's a gutsy move. Yeah.
It is. And I don't want anybody sending me an email in a month and go, dude, thanks. I showed up at Alco and started, and then I got fired. So play that card how you will. She was very
read the room. Yeah,
exactly. Read the room. But that's a really cool story. And I like to tell that story because it shows it made an impact, and it's kind of cool. Yeah. So,
cool. Well, Eric, thank you for joining me today and for giving your insights. Hopefully this prompts a lot of conversations and a lot of collaboration across bank departments, and, helps marketing to, get the budget that they need and the resources that they need from decision makers. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And if I can be of assistance, I'm out on LinkedIn quite a bit. You can find me there with all of our websites and everything. So just track me down, send me an invitation to connect, mention that you heard me on the show. If you would like to connect the dots, it's always fun to see where people come from and when we get a chance to connect. But I'm happy to. I love chatting with marketers and helping them however I can. I've been doing it now for over 30 years, which makes me feel like an old guy. But in some ways, I feel like things are just starting again. Things are getting exciting, and so many new things are out there. We got to stick together and help each other. So I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today and connect with folks. So
Absolutely. Thank you.
cool. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Correspondent podcast from Independent Correspondent Bankers Bank. We hope you've heard something that you can take back to your community bank. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review, or on Spotify, turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you next time, community bankers.